Bonjour à toutes et tous, vous écoutez First Print, votre podcast comics préféré pour une nouvelle émission du format Super Friends, le podcast qui va à la rencontre des personnes qui font vivre la pop culture et la culture comics par leur travail. On a vraiment une fin d'année assez exceptionnelle sur le podcast, je trouve, puisque voilà, on a des quantités d'invités toutes aussi merveilleux, plus merveilleux les uns que les autres, et c'est un retour même dans ce podcast puisque nous allons retrouver Jeff Lemire à l'occasion de sa venue sur Paris, notamment pour une exposition dédiée aux Éphémères, sa dernière sortie aux éditions Futuropolis. On a eu le plaisir de se poser dans la galerie Acheter de l'art en compagnie de Corentin ici présent. Salut. Salut. Et donc, voilà, dans cette galerie, on remercie d'ailleurs Ludovic Monnier de la galerie Acheter de l'art de nous avoir prêté ce nouveau studio pour pouvoir enregistrer le podcast. Donc, on va pouvoir vous parler de Jeff Lemire. Enfin, on va pouvoir parler avec Jeff Lemire de nouveau. Et à l'inverse de la précédente émission, on va vraiment se concentrer sur ses travaux qu'il écrit et qu'il dessine, notamment ce qui est sorti chez Futuro, entre autres, déjà une de ses œuvres majeures, sa première œuvre Essex County, mais aussi d'autres titres plus récents comme alors The Nobody, c'est pas très récent, mais chez Futuro, c'est un petit peu plus récent. Et aussi donc le Labyrinthe Inachevé, The Maze Book, et Fish Flies, les éphémères. Donc le générique se lance, c'est un podcast intégralement en anglais et ça nous fait super plaisir de vous le proposer. J'espère que vous apprécierez l'effort générique. And so you didn't understand at all what I was saying, but I was just saying that we are really glad to have you here back in the podcast, Jeff Lemire. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having me again.
So today it's going to be a discussion a little bit different from the previous time we had you, because we really want to focus on the comics that you are writing and drawing at the same time. So we already discussed a little bit about how you were reading comic books when you were younger and that kind of stuff. But do you remember when you really tried to draw comic books your own way, when you decided that not only you wanted to write stories but also draw them?
I think for me, the drawing came first when I was younger. I mostly drew. I didn't write stories so much. I just would copy pictures from DC Comics or Marvel Comics from a very young age. So it was always art first, and then even the way I started getting more serious about comics, I think, was just by keeping a sketchbook when I was in film school and when I was in my early 20s. And I just would draw all the time. And the stories came from the drawing. So for me, when I got serious about comics, it was always going to be stuff that I drew myself. So I think I really didn't think I could do it, though. I didn't take it seriously until I was in film school. I was in my 20s, and I like telling stories through film, but I much preferred telling them by drawing them myself, so much more freedom. So when I graduated from film school in 1999, 2000, I believe, just 23 years ago, I started taking it more seriously and just drawing every day, very just kind of self-taught. I didn't have any traditional art training. And I didn't know any other cartoonists in Toronto, even though there were a lot of cartoonists in Toronto. I just didn't know them. So I was really on my own trying to figure it out by myself. And there were like 3 or 4 years between 2000 and 2004 that I just was experimenting and slowly getting a little bit better and starting to take it more seriously.
But would you say that you had any influences, for example, maybe the drawing that you were copying at the time, or when you say that you were self-learning, it's really that you developed your style out of nowhere?
Yeah, I mean, I did. There were big influences on me, but I didn't really draw like those people. Dave McKean was a big influence, Cages, because it was so just those sparse, simplistic ink drawings, that he was doing in that they were so expressive and they felt very immediate. So I tried to capture that kind of energy. In the early 2000s, Paul Pope was very new and very exciting. He was so energetic, his brushwork. So that was inspiring. And then I also started getting into some of the more independent cartoonists like Charles Burns and Dan Clowes. And I didn't really draw like them, but I was inspired by their, I guess they were also such individual voices, you know, and it was really trying to find my own voice within that. And it took a while, you know, you kind of, I think whenever you start anything, you start by emulating the things you like or trying to emulate the things you like, but then slowly you lose the things that don't feel like you know, and you find yourself. It's a long process, you know, to find your own style, and especially when you don't have any formal art training. So your mistakes and your idiosyncrasies, you know, the things about your artwork that are kind of sometimes flaws become part of the style, and you can embrace them and kind of make them part of the style in an interesting way, you know. And early on, I knew that I wasn't a perfect draftsman, but there was a certain energy and mood to my work that I loved. And so I just tried to focus on that and foster that as much as possible.
I think I read somewhere that you also were influenced by Hugo Pratt and Jose Munoz.
Yeah.
Which I can see in the use of your black ink drawings. Is that something that came after all the American and Canadian comics?
Yeah. So when I was younger, when I was a kid, the only comics I had access to as a child were Marvel and DC comics, you know. And then when I was a bit older and I moved to Toronto, there were better comic book stores, and I, you know, discovered first the independent American artists like Charles Burns and Dan Clowes and Seth. And then quickly after that, I started looking at all the European artists, and that was, you know, Hugo Pratt, Munoz, Munoz, especially just that, again, that really expressive, direct, stripped down ink style was something that I was really trying to find my own version of that, you know. So it was a progress. It started with Spider-Man and Batman, and then it ended up with discovering all these European cartoonists and having access to just so many more comics, you know, and just constantly finding new things to be inspired by.
Yeah. You said that you wanted to pursue this career because you liked drawing and writing eventually. But do you feel like you could live out of it from the first years?
Oh, no.
No.
Yeah. No, I worked as a cook in a restaurant for many years, and then I would do my comics in my free time, you know, and I kind of thought that would be my life. I didn't think I could ever make a living doing comics. Even when I first started getting published with Essex County, it was great to be published, and I was, you know, nominated for awards and things, but I still wasn't making really enough money to live off of. So I never really thought that I would make a career, you know. I thought I would have to work in kitchens and then just do my comics as my passion. But somehow my work caught the attention of DC Comics and Vertigo, and Sweet Tooth happened. And then it opened up this whole other side of my career that's a little more mainstream and lucrative, thankfully.
But at the beginning, you were because Sweet Tooth is in colors, but from the beginning, with Essex County or even Lost Dogs that you did before, it was all black and white.
Yeah.
Was it also a choice by purpose? Did you find that maybe there was a difficulty to play with colors in your comics?
Yeah, I mean, I always just focused on black and white art when I was younger, out of necessity too, because when you're self-publishing, it's just much cheaper to print black and white, and I didn't have any money. So color was not an option. But then when I worked with Vertigo, all their books are color. So I really had to rely on my collaborator, Jose Villarrubia, who a friend of mine, to really, those first years, I just didn't understand color at all. And I just did my work and he colored it, and we were kind of separate in that way. And then over the course of doing Sweet Tooth, I got more interested in watercolor myself and playing with color in different ways. And so now I mostly color my own work, and it's very satisfying to do that. Yeah.
And how do you choose the project that you are going to write and draw now? Because at the beginning you didn't have a choice because you didn't have an artist to pick.
Yeah.
But now, man, you've done tons and tons of comic books. You're one of the most prolific writer in the industry. So how do you choose which are the ones that you're going to draw? Fish Flies, Maze Book. How do you decide that?
It's pretty organic process. I think my career is kind of divided into two worlds where the things that I write for other artists generally are a little more genre based, a little more mainstream. And the stuff that I do myself is a little more personal, a little more idiosyncratic, and maybe a little surreal. So when thinking of new stories, usually have the artist in mind before I even think of a story. So I know who I'm collaborating with. If it's Andrea Sorrentino or Dustin Nguyen, I'll think of a story that suits them, you know, and it's kind of similar when I draw, when it's time for me to think of a new project for myself. I think of things that I want to draw and that suit my style. So I'm always, I guess it's not so much that I have a story and then I try to find an artist or decide if it's more like I have the artist and then I think of the story, and for myself as well. So,
do you think that you'll ever be comfortable with letting someone else draw Canada for you?
I don't know. No, I can do that
because it's a big part of your work. I mean, usually, I think I read another time that you said you wanted Sweet Tooth to begin in Milwaukee because it looked the most like Essex County in Canada.
Yeah, Nebraska. Yeah, because it's flat and open, and it's the environment I love drawing and I'm familiar with. So yeah.
So is it just because you're familiar with this environment that Canada and Essex is so present in a lot of your personal works?
Yeah, I mean, I think I grew up in that landscape as a kid, and that's where my imagination developed, you know. So I think it's kind of part of the DNA of my creativity somehow, you know, and it's also what I know the best because I live there. So I sometimes feel that the more specific you can be about a region or a location in your story, ironically, it becomes more universal. The more detailed and specific you can be, the more anyone can kind of feel like they're part of that world or something. So yeah, I guess I keep going back to it. A lot of my stories are linked to my childhood, and like, I don't know, I try not to analyze the psychology of it, but yes, it's sort of my creative well for whatever reason. I just keep going back to it. So
if I ask you the origin of Essex County, do you still remember how it came to be, or is it?
Yeah,
or was it too long ago?
Pretty much. The book, yeah, it's a combination of things. You know, it was the original Essex County story was just the first chapter, so it was just the story of Tales from the Farm, Lester and Jimmy, and that was just a very short story I was working on. I didn't plan the bigger graphic novel, and that was just really a story about childhood imagination, and it was kind of like very close to how I was as a child. You know, I wore a cape and a mask and would run around the farm and lost in my imagination, you know, and dreaming of having this larger than life friend who I could play with, or who would, you know, be like my superhero. So that was really just a story about my own childhood in a lot of ways. But as we were just saying, when I started to draw the landscape in the place I was from, something about that felt very real and natural for me, and I wanted to do more of that. So I also always wanted to do a story about hockey because I grew up playing hockey and love the sport. And so I had a separate idea. They weren't really connected about that. And I realized, oh no, I could connect these things. It can be part of the same town, the same families, the same. And as soon as that clicked, it just became that bigger thing, you know? Before that, I had been doing stuff that was more like science fiction, horror things that didn't feel very personal, and none of them were very successful. And then when I tried this short story about where I grew up, it unlocked something creatively in me that I'm still drawing from now, you know, 25 years later. So it was just by kind of going back to my own life, my own childhood, and where I grew up, just was provided this creative fuel that was very exciting, and that whole book came out of that.
It's also in Essex County that we see the character of Lou, who lives in the city, and who kind of, he has this phrase when he says, "You become part of it, like you run through its veins." And there's always this this place that you allow for nature and forest and the winter and the countryside. Yet you don't seem to put that much effort into big cities. And in May's book, it feels like a maze, like a trap. Is that something that you associate immediately with your work? I mean, just leaving the city for the countryside, the rural communities?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when I did the original Essex County books, I was living in Toronto, which is the biggest city in Canada, right downtown. So I grew up in this very remote rural setting, and then I moved to the most dense urban setting, and the shock of that as a young person was very overwhelming, but very, again, creatively exciting, juxtaposing these two worlds. But yeah, then in May's book, I really wanted to tell another story about the city again, you know, and yeah, it can feel, sometimes it can feel like a prison to be in a city, you know, and there is a freedom that comes from leaving it for sure.
But still in Essex County, you said you had the elements from your childhood, from your whole life, and you have also the character that you are just depicting. And I mean, the whole story is quite, I would say, gloomy. I don't know, quite moody at least.
Yeah, sure.
How do you combine these kind of elements between your whole personal life and also the life of other people that maybe exist only in your head, or maybe you have known in your
life? I don't know. You know, my childhood wasn't as gloomy as the
I hope
book,
so. I hope
you
for
know?
you.
But I guess for me, I've always been drawn to stories that are very emotionally resonant, and so I kind of amplify feelings of loneliness or sadness and isolation, these things, because it just leads to a more emotional story and a more cathartic story for me. So yeah, I mean, I am, it's always taking little things from your life, but it's never straight autobiography. I'm always combining fiction and also other people's lives of people I know, or, you know, stories I've heard. And so, you know, you're always just drawing from everything and kind of trying to make something that is emotionally resonant. And I guess my stories tend to be sometimes a little darker or moodier, but that's probably me processing things myself, you know.
Is there a recipe for having emotions on a page?
No, not really. It's it often starts with putting too much on the page when you're writing, and then slowly pulling back, you know. There's no recipe. It's just, you kind of follow your instinct, honestly. Yeah. Sometimes you feel you go too far, you have to pull it back a little. Sometimes you don't go far enough. It's just a gut feeling, really. There's no recipe.
You said sometimes it was stories you heard, but in The Nobody, it's mostly a story you read because you did your own take on the Invisible Man. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yet it does very much feel like a Jeff Lemire story. So how did this one came about?
Geez, I got to remember.
No, you've got memory issues.
It's more recent.
Well, I think it was again a combination of different things. I had done Essex County. The other sort of part of Canada I had spent a lot of time in as a child was a more northern Ontario, which is where the Nobody is set. I spent my summers there, you know. And also my wife who I had just met was from that area so I wanted to tell another regional story about that area of Canada, the small sort of fishing community in the snow and the north. And then at the same time, completely separate from that, I was rereading a lot of H.G. Wells and Jules Verne novels. I just was. And somehow the idea of taking that character and almost putting him in this small, very Canadian, very specific setting became very exciting for me to draw. I was also really inspired by Joe Kubert as Unknown Soldier. Do you know that comic? The bandaged face. I love drawing that character. So, you know, you're just combining all these things and something sparks and it just takes off, you know?
Yeah. Because when you talked about Fish Flies on Substack, you said you wanted to connect your the genre part of your career with the more slow-paced, grounded ones. Yet in The Nobody, we have this character from a fantastic imagination, and you have your own take on it. And you have these sort of covers that are really EC Comics World publishing ones. Yeah. It feels more pulp on the cover. Yeah. It doesn't exactly in the pages.
Yeah.
So do you feel like you've always wanted to connect these two obsessions you have?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I think my best work kind of blurs the line between genre work and the more personal stuff. You know, even Essex County, the first book, especially of Essex with Lester, it kind of veers into the fantastic a little bit, you know, and Sweet Tooth, certainly it's a science fiction book, but it's also very, very quiet and very personal. And so yeah, I'm always trying to find the balance between those two things, you know. And sometimes, depending on who I'm working with, if I have an opportunity to work with a certain artist, I'll go further into like horror or science fiction because it suits them, and it's, you know, but yeah, with my own work, I love blending genres. So it's never really one genre, but it kind of touches on all genres, you know? Yeah, I guess. Yeah. So for Fish Flies, it was really, I had just done Maze Book, which was very quiet and personal. And I just felt like doing something a little bolder and bigger and a little more, you know, drawing monsters and stuff and having fun with that aspect, but also, again, doing my own version of that, not the typical version.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've noticed in many of your books that you can also use the landscapes as like a pacing feature. Landscapes can add a pose to the stories. Is it really how you use them? How do you balance the pacing of your stories between pure action, even if it's not really action type stories, and also like the pose that you have to put also for the reader for sometimes to just digest what we just read and so.
Yeah, I kind of discovered that sort of pacing or storytelling style with Essex County, where
you've got 5 or 6 pages with just landscapes.
It's all about pacing and sort of I try to put the reader in the world, you know, and sometimes when you're in, it's like you said, you give them a scene with dialogue and story and things, but then you need to let them, it's just pacing and letting it breathe and juxtaposing those moments with quieter moments, and it makes those moments feel bigger in a way, you know.
But is it something that is already into your script when you're writing them, or is it something that you can play with when you're drawing?
I usually find it when I'm drawing, because that's the kind of stuff when you're writing the script, you can't, you see the pacing, but not as clearly as when you start drawing it. You find those pages and you kind of, as you're thumbnailing, you just know you need to let something breathe, or if you're going between 2 scenes, you need something to connect them. And you kind of find those things more when you're drawing.
It's something that you did, especially in Maze Book, because I think it's one of your works with the most use, the best use. I don't know if that's the best use, but it's really loaded in terms of panels and shapes, and the way that you put the allegory and the idea of the Maze Book in motion and in setting.
Yeah.
Is that something that you planned from the beginning?
Yeah, I knew. I mean, when you have that book, that idea just lent itself. It's such a graphic element to begin with. A maze, the visual of a maze. As soon as I had the idea, I just started to see the potential of using that in the storytelling and on the page in interesting ways. It felt like it would be a waste not to do things with it, you know? So that it was just that idea inspired that kind of storytelling. It was just so perfect for it. And you know, the way comic panels are laid out, it's almost like a maze sometimes anyway. So it's just such a perfect combination of a graphic element, a thematic element, and then storytelling just kind of works so well together. I had those ideas from the beginning. I wanted to do that. Yeah.
Plus on many layers, because you had the red string. That I'm not going to spoil what happens in the book, but you have the Minotaur from the Aryan myth of the Minotaur. I mean, did all that? It looks kind of an Alan Moore-ish layered picture in picture. Did you have something particular in mind when you wanted to do this book, like a challenge? Like, I'm going to do this allegory and push it as high as I can?
Some of it came later. I like the Minotaur and the thread didn't come until later. But then once you have the idea, it seems so natural to what I was doing anyway, you know? I don't know. I wish I thought that much about these things before, but sometimes you're finding them as you're doing them, to be honest. And then sometimes it's not until you're finished something, you kind of realize what you've done. Even you know, you certainly have a bit of a plan, but it's so organic. Things add themselves to it, and you discover new things as you're going. And then afterwards, it all seems like it was meant to be, but it's not always.
We already spoke a little bit about how the family as a structure was really interesting to you, appealing to you. Mm-hmm. But in the book that we're discussing, Essex County or even Maze Book, the loss or the absence of characters is also quite important. We're speaking about a father who has lost his kid. There are sometimes the mother is missing. Why is there not why, but what does it bring to the story? The fact that there are some familiar elements missing.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to explain. I mean, as a kid, I had a very close family and a big family, and I certainly had like a lot of. There was a lot of grandparents and aunts and uncles who died when I, as a child, and I would be kind of witness to the grief and things. And I think it made an impact on me. And also it goes back to just trying to tell very pure human emotional stories. And sometimes the loss of loved ones is the most kind of intense thing we can experience. So it's just such a rich emotional place to start with. And it takes your characters and you can, get to the core of your characters because you're stripping them down and getting to something that's so intense and personal right away with them. Yeah,
I think you also, in another interview, talked about the possible connection between Underwater Dweller and the Maze book, because it was kind of the same character at different stages
it's
of his
like an
life.
inverse almost, you know, where the Welder was about a new father and a new child, and then the Maze book is almost the opposite, where someone is a bit older and who's lost their child. And so it's kind of a bookend, like two extremes, the beginning of life and the end of beginning of fatherhood and the end of fatherhood. And I guess for me, I was trying to think of something that would make that character in Maze book the loneliest person in the world. And to me, as a father, I couldn't think of anything worse than losing my child. So you just project a little bit of that into it, and yeah, I thought it was interesting to kind of explore that fatherhood from these two different extremes.
Yeah. But you didn't start talking with dogs in the street.
I can't say that I did. Not yet, anyway.
But it's not maybe. I don't know if I'm far too stretched because in Essex County we were starting with a kid. In May's book, it's a father. Can we say that your whole experience of fatherhood had an impact on the stories you have been writing?
Yeah, it's not even that, because I think when I did Sweet Tooth Sweet Tooth was when I did Essex County. It was more about thinking of my own childhood. I wasn't a parent yet. No. I wasn't even married yet, and then you can see throughout my career, I became a young father, and you see Sweet Tooth and Animal Man, Underwater Welder, about these young fathers with young children. And now you're seeing stories where I'm a bit older and looking, looking back, and my son's growing up. And so, yeah, you kind of see my journey as a man and a father throughout the work, really.
Can you speak a little bit now about your latest publication, which is Fish Flies? So it was a really special project because you started it on the internet, on Substack. So you have there's a forward, a postface in the book that explains a little bit the story. But could you tell us a little bit? Could you tell us?
Yeah, I had finished May's book and didn't really know what to do next. I was very proud of May's book, but it felt like a step forward for me, and I didn't know what to do next. And I was driving home to Essex County with my family for a holiday, and I think it was the time of summer when in Essex County, these actual fish flies, these bugs come out for a couple of weeks. They come off the Great Lakes and they cover
it really seems awful.
It's disgusting. They cover the ground and the buildings for like a couple of weeks, and then they just die, and that's it. And I kind of forgotten about them because we don't get them in the city, Toronto. But when I came back when they were out, and I started remembering them, and remembering as a child going to this. I have a very vivid memory of going to a convenience store, which was lit up at night, and these bugs covering the ground and the wall and the windows and everything, and crunching under my feet is disgusting. And then so I had that was kind of percolating, that's such an interesting visual, and I was also kind of at the same time thinking it would be interesting to do a sort of a crime story, a rural crime story, because I hadn't really done that genre yet. And those two ideas came together, which is the opening of the book, of these young boys one summer night going to a convenience store to get candy or whatever, popsicles, and these bugs are covering it, and then this sort of terrible event unfolds, and it just kind of grew out of that memory from my own childhood, and these bugs becoming like a metaphor for some evil in the in the world, and then the story has really grown into something totally different from then, because then I thought of this character of the young girl and this friendship between them, which was not part of the original idea, but kind of just sprung out of drawing things in my sketchbook. And the story really evolved into what it is now, which is this story of an unlikely friendship. And also it's sort of about, childhood traumas and how they can shape us as we grow up, and sort of these cycles of violence that families can, you grow up being surrounded by violence and things, and you kind of fall into that world. And I don't want to spoil the end of the story, but it becomes more about this cycle of violence and these two characters sort of representing different sides of that and coming together.
You really like outcast characters, because we've got a friendship between two outcasts, basically. Yeah. One from school, one from life because of his doings. And it really seems like you had other outcast characters in your whole bibliography.
Nobody also has that there.
Yeah. Well, it's great. Girl. I love putting two unexpected characters together that are very different, and they juxtapose each other because it creates it just creates drama and conflict and interesting character work. So, like the Nobody had the teenage girl and the invisible man, and then Sweet Tooth had the little boy and the big kind of killer. And then again, we have this giant monster and this little girl. And it's fun to juxtapose two unlikely people and put them on a little journey together. I find that very exciting and fun to do.
How did you choose the design, for the creature, which has this strangely human eye in a design that's more like Cronenbergian?
Yeah.
How did you?
There was a lot of just weeks just trying different things in my sketchbook before I found the design that I ended up using. So it was a real process, and some of them were too disgusting, and then some of them too human. So he was trying to find a balance. It needed to look otherworldly and like a monster, but it also you had to feel empathy for this creature, and it's all in the eyes, and his body language and things. So it was it was really a trial and error of just trying different things in a sketchbook until something just kind of clicked, and it felt right, Yeah.
And even though you're not doing your work in black and white, so you're using water painting, I guess. So how do you set also the color that you're going to use for Fish Face? But even though for other stories where you have like a color tone, a color mood for the whole story, like in this one it's more green with a touch of orange.
Yeah.
So how do you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of it's my own limitation as a painter. I'm still not fully comfortable doing full color work yet. And I do like the graphic element of more monotone, like one or two colors with something that really pops. I just find it graphically very exciting. In May's book, you had the red thread running through the book, and I think that was probably still fresh on my mind. And then with the character of Franny, the girl with her orange jacket, I tried it and it just looked good, and I could not do it after I saw what it's so striking on the page and so graphic. And so I really like using a very limited color palette, but then having these moments of something really popping off the page is graphically exciting. Yeah.
But you'd be interested in doing full color eventually?
Yeah, I've tried a little here and there. Royal City, I tried to do. It's just it's also so time consuming, and I'm writing a lot of books, drawing a lot of books, and then trying to fully paint something. Even I can't pull that off. So the limited color palette helps. Certainly, it makes more sense with my schedule, and it just kind of suits my style. I think a little more than full color does.
How did it change to publish your comics on Substack, which is a newsletter platform?
Yeah.
So we know that it's Nick Spencer that got you into it.
Yeah.
And how did it change your approach in terms of really storytelling?
Well, if I'm being honest, I'd already finished a couple hundred pages of Fish Lies before I ever heard of Substack. So it was.
But what about the Black Hammer stories you did for Substack then?
Yeah. Again, I had already done that story too. So it's
such a fraud.
I'm a fraud. I'm a fraud. I just broke them up for it was
just took the money.
Yeah, kind of. Come on. Yeah, a little bit. But then, it was interesting putting it out because I usually wait till a book's almost all done before I publish it. But I was publishing this in increments before I was really, sometimes I think when I started putting it on Substack, like I didn't know where it was going even. So some of the chapters in Substack are actually different from what's published because the story evolved and I figured things out of where I was going. Characters changed. So it was almost like a first draft that was kind of interesting, I think, to see like an earlier incarnation of the story.
But you kind of drew away from the standard 20 pages comic book monthly, even with Macebook and now with Substack. Do you feel like it's maybe something that you would like to explore even more in the future, like the graphic novels, the web formats, or stuff that are less limiting?
Which you are quite doing with Andrea, for example, with the whole Bone Orchard Might.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the North American comic book market is so, I feel so limited in how everything is published the same, 20 pages, and it's like the comics can be so much, they can be so much more, and so why not let the story dictate the format rather than the other way around? So lately I've been sort of just not worrying about the publishing of it, just focusing on the story, starting working on it. And then once it's well underway, then I figure out how I'm going to publish it, and it doesn't always fit that model. So I also feel like, and I don't know how it is in France, but the North American market is so competitive now there's so much stuff being published every month. So if I put Fish Flies out as 20 pages for $4, it just felt, for it to stand out, I wanted something more. So I put 60 pages, for the price of almost a normal comic, and it immediately feels like the reader's getting more for their money and something worth buying and just something a little different, This helps it stand out. Yeah.
But you said early on this podcast that you felt like you had two careers. Do you think like comics like Fish Flies or Nobody or Macebook maybe would tend to attract the eyes of a more broader general, maybe people who like books without pictures, maybe?
Absolutely, yeah.
Like maybe you have already a step in this direction this way.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that the stuff that I've drawn myself tends to have a longer life. It keeps selling in bookstores and with people outside of the mainstream superhero comic world, and a more diverse readership as well, and then the more specifically superhero genre stuff. It's fun to do, but it's more limited in its readership. It's more one type of reader, So yeah, definitely.
And there's really something special with Fish Flies. It's that we've got the first book before the United States.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's something that you never done before. Yeah. So how did it come to be? Was it just a simple discussion with the French publisher, or how
well, I'd worked with Futuropolis on Macebook and in Essex County, and Nobody. So we had a relationship, and I think Alain asked to see what I had of Fish Flies already, and I'd already done the first half of the book before I even started publishing it anywhere. So he proposed the idea of doing it as the two books, and it would come out here. The whole first book would come out here before it's published in the States. And I thought it'd be an interesting thing to try. I like trying something new. So, yeah.
But in a more general terms, how do you have a say in which publisher is going to do your books? Because you've been published in France with almost every comic book publisher now.
Yeah.
Do you have a say in?
Yeah, I do. Ultimately, we decide on that. I mean, the stuff I do for Marvel or DC, I don't don't have any say in that. That's
it was more about your creative.
But anything I've created myself, different publishers will make different offers, and then we decide. But I have a good relationship with Alain, and I tend to the stuff like Fish Flies, Essex County, and the slightly more literary, personal work. It just seems to suit his sensibility as well, and then. Some of the stuff that's a little more serialized genre stuff fits with urban, so you kind of find the publisher that suits the material and yeah.
And just speaking about trying new things, you have recently adapted Essex County on the Canadian network, I think.
Yeah.
CBC, is that it?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Which is actually really well fitted for a book that is so Canadian.
Yeah.
Can you maybe just tell us a bit about how did you work on that project? Or?
Yes.
You
wrote.
I did it all. I wrote the whole thing and produced it and was like the showrunner. So it was a long process. We started working on the adaptation in 2017, and it went through many variations of scripts and different co-writers and things that just weren't clicking. And then sometime like 2020, we kind of tried one more time to do it. And I just did it myself. I wrote the first couple episodes and we finally got a green light and the funding and things. So, we did it. It's a 5-episode miniseries that we did. I wrote all the episodes with a co-writer, produced it, and we shot it 2 summers ago in Canada. It was a very
long process.
Yeah, a very long process. And then when production actually started, it just took over my whole life for over a year. I was just away from my family, away from comics, doing this TV show. And it was very intense. And I don't think I'll ever do it again. It almost broke me.
But was it hard or interesting to go back to this story and to write it in another way? Because it seems obvious that writing for the comic genre is not the same thing as for the television.
Oh, for sure. Totally different. Yeah, that was a real learning process of what parts of the graphic novel work and on the screen and which parts didn't. And that was all part of the process. But yeah, that part of it creatively was very interesting, of re-examining these characters, these stories at a totally different part of my life, I think when I originally did the book, I was really writing from the point of view of me as a kid. And now
and getting back to it 20 years later.
Yeah, now I could relate more to the older characters in the story, So that was really creatively very interesting, but I really missed my routine of making comics every day and the purity of comics and the directness of that medium and how I can just do it almost by myself, and what I write or draw goes directly to the reader, and with film or television, it just takes so long and there's so many people involved and it's so hard to keep your vision. And,
you had to fight?
No, I had control, but there's always fighting. Yeah. There's a lot of egos and a lot of different personalities involved, and you have to navigate all that stuff, which is not something I'm really used to. And, it was a good experience and I'm glad I did it, but it made me appreciate comics even more, honestly. Yeah.
Did you ever want it to go back to the Essex County, let's say universe, but you did additional short stories that were combined in the whole Essex County complete edition?
They were done at the same time as the original book, though.
So my question is, really, would you like to go back to
I'll never go back. Yeah. I think sometimes that book is done so well and people really like it and it still sells and still people are still discovering it. And,
but you did go back to Sweet Tooth.
Yeah. And I regret going back to Sweet Tooth.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like when something's done and I'm satisfied with it, I have to move on, it's something new. So Fish Flies kind of touches on, it mentions certain places and things that are in Essex County but they're just kind of fun Easter eggs and it's not a direct, connection. Yeah, I feel like when something's done, it's done, and you have to move on to a new thing for sure.
Okay, speaking about the future, so at the time that we are recording this podcast, are you finished with Fish Flies, or are you still drawing?
I have 23 pages left to draw, so I'll probably finish like mid-December. Yeah, I'll be done. Yeah.
And you have already the next project written and drawn in your head, and you're still...
I have 2. I have to decide which one I'm going to do. So yeah, we'll see.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Jeff. It was really a pleasure to have you back, and I hope
my pleasure. Thanks.
And we have still to discuss about Black Hammer.
Yeah,
but I guess it will be for another time.
Yeah, some big Black Hammer stuff coming soon. So yeah.
Okay, so definitely we're going to have to talk. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Et c'est donc la fin de ce podcast. Comme d'habitude, on vous le répète, si ce genre de travail vous plaît, que vous appréciez nos émissions et que vous voulez également soutenir les personnes qui viennent dans l'émission, eh bien il suffit de partager ce podcast partout où vous le pouvez sur les réseaux sociaux. Merci à toutes et tous de nous avoir écoutés. Salut Corentin.
Salut.
Et à très bientôt pour le prochain podcast. Ciao.
Arnaud, il a acheté une planche.
Ça, bâtard.